Good evening and welcome to the Oaklander. I'm your host, Al DiGiacomo. Our show tonight will differ slightly from our shows in the past. I hope that you can sit back, relax, and enjoy the program as a public access vacation. I met our first guest last month while preparing our interview with Bill Cole. Guy Cole, Bill's son, is a maker of violas, violins, and cellos. He is known as a luthier. To tell us more about his craft and his travels to foreign lands is Guy Cole. Thanks for being on the Oaklander, Guy.
Thank you.
How old were you when you first became involved musically?
About 14 years.
And what was the first instrument that you had started to play?
I started on the guitar, actually. And I was at Valley Middle School at the time and became involved with the band. And we participated in a talent show and actually won, which is kind of a kick when you're 14 years old.
Sure.
And went on from there to get into another rock and roll band, but found that it didn't really do it for me as far as musical satisfaction was concerned.
What were your influences back then?
My influences were mainly, first of all, the satisfaction with the entire scene, but also I started listening to classical music, and it started to change my perspective.
And how did your interest in violins come about?
It came about actually by chance. There was a friend of mine who was studying the violin. He had previously studied voice lessons, and he started studying with my teacher, Isabel Wegman, and he became engrossed in it and advised me to do the same, and it just caught on, and it never left. It was great.
So you started playing the violin with Isabel Wegman, and where did that lead you?
It led me ultimately to the Manhattan School of Music because I was interested in woodworking as well. I'd studied at the Manhattan School with Rene Morel, and he advised me to go to Salt Lake City and study with Peter Prier at the Violin Making School of America.
Is that the foremost school for luthiers?
Of course.
I see. And basically, what was the program there? Was it?
It was very varied. They had an art program. They had an orchestra program. Violin playing was absolutely mandatory.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there was woodworking. There was the study of violin making, and also identification of violins that have been made some time ago.
History.
Yes, exactly.
A historical perspective on them?
Yeah, it's a very important part of the craft.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you get into that, you wind up dealing with a lot of very large numbers in terms of monetary influence. And one has to know what one is involved with. So that we studied, we had a number of Stradivariuses through the school. We had a number of other makers who are worth a great deal of money. And we had to know what they look like, how they're made, how to identify them. And that was a very important part. The other part of it was art instruction, which I loved. And it involved drawing, and there was an art component to the graduation aspect of it. You had to present a piece of artwork that you drew or you composed yourself in order to graduate.
Sounds like a very well-rounded course.
They really turned it. Peter, I should say, Peter is the one who was the driving force behind this. Peter did a very good job.
And how long is this for people who may have an interest?
It's a 4-year course. I got out in 3 years because I was motivated to get into a repair shop in order to further my restoration expertise, so to speak. But generally speaking, it takes 4 years.
Okay, and so this has been some years since you've graduated.
Yeah.
And where has this vocation taken you now?
Well, it's taken me, oddly enough, to China. And that's something I didn't expect when I first got into it, but it developed because I met a Chinese woman when I was in school in my last year and her first year, and we fell in love and we got married. And so, one thing happened after another, and we wound up going back to China very frequently, and eventually developing contacts that she had made when she was a violin maker in China 10 years prior to her arrival in America, and it sort of snowballed into what is happening right now, which is essentially trying to build up the quality of violins from China to the extent that I learned and she learned in Salt Lake City under Peter Preer's tutelage.
Is this something new to the Chinese craftsmen?
A lot of it is, and it surprises me because I always assume that they know what I know, but quite often they don't, and so it's up to me to try to convince them to do it this way rather than that way.
What are some of the aspects that the people of China regard about Americans going over there and showing them something new? Do they welcome it, or?
Some of them do. Naturally, the ones that I prefer to work with do, but some of them don't. Some of them tend to be very ground into what they've assumed was correct before, and they don't listen. And then, on the other hand, some of them are extremely receptive, and they want to know everything they can get. And that is what really excites me, because I can give them what I've got. I'm not saying I have everything, but at least I can give them what I've got.
Well, I'm sure it's a very cultural experience for you, traveling halfway around the world and working with people that most people in Oakland may not have the opportunity to do. What other aspects do they see in Americans? I understand they have a love for Richard Nixon.
Yes.
What's the reason for that?
I think it's because he opened the doors. He did a great deal to build up the contact between the American and the Chinese government. And I grew up in a situation where I was influenced to think of only negative thoughts about this gentleman. And I'm not going to say my ideas were entirely turned around, but they were certainly altered by this, because I look at that influence and I think, wait a minute, maybe he did do something pretty good.
Well, you mentioned there were 3 passions that come into play in the making of fine instruments, and those of being sculpture, music, and painting. Could you elaborate what you were getting into with that?
Yes. First of all, when one decides to make a violin, one first of all cuts down a tree. And what you do, you don't squeeze it out like a waffle. You wind up sculpting it with tools. Then the ultimate product, which is what we call in the white, is varnished and maybe actually painted over in certain ways in order to ornament it. And then, hopefully, when it's played, it produces beautiful music.
And as for sculpture, music, and painting in the world of fine arts, who do you revere in sculpture?
Oh, there's no question about it. When I think I was 9 years old, I went to the World's Fair in New York City, and I saw Michelangelo's Pietà, and it was devastating. It just nailed me. I don't know how to describe the feeling, and you know, being that young, it just sort of generated me in a certain direction.
It surely left you speechless.
Yeah.
And when you think of great painting, I know that you were explaining to me on the different types of varnishes and the different types of finishing, and you kind of blend that into some of the great artists. Who are some of your favorite painters?
Well, certainly, once again, Michelangelo, but also Leonardo da Vinci, Vincent van Gogh, Rembrandt. People who had an idea about realism that transcended what most people view it as.
Well, Guy, it sounds like wonderful work that you seem to be into. And we will continue with Guy Cole after this brief message. Please stay with us.
Hi there, I'm Sean DeLore, and I'm here to remind you that the Oaklander wants you to be involved in public access television. This show is the first of its kind for Oakland, and we want to showcase your talent and creativity. So far, we've had everything from classical guitar to jazz and blues, rock and roll, painters, chess champions, and even comedy. Come on, guys, Frosty for president? We can even come to you. If you can't make it to TCI Studios, our Oaklander team has a few more people taking the TCI training class, and they will be joining us in June, so we can cover more of what you want to see. So pick up that phone and call us today at 405-1084 or write to us at P.O. Box 312, Oakland, New Jersey. We want you to be a part of this show.
I mean, I can be part of the show?
No, not you, Al.
To the program. We're now in Guy Cole's studio. Guy, who invented the violin?
It's a matter of debate, but generally it was attributed to Gasparo da Salo, who lived in Salo, in Italy. And it happened around 1480 to 1500. It preceded the music that was written for it, and that is another matter of debate, because Vivaldi, who was a very famous composer, wrote a lot of music for solo violin and really made the violin happen. This happened about 50 years afterwards. And after that, the violin took off. As far as literature, it became an incredible influence in music.
Were there much variations from the original invention?
No, actually, very few.
They've stayed more or less the same for 400 years?
Yeah, and people have tried to change it one way or another, but the changes have either been resisted or ineffectual. They just didn't work.
Well, I see that you have some of your works in progress here. I'd like to show some of the folks at home some of the various woods that you use in your construction.
Of course.
These are some lovely woods that you're working with here, Guy. What are some of the type of woods that you use in the making of the violin?
Actually, basically there are three types of woods. This, the back, is made of maple, almost exclusively. The top is made of spruce, and the sides are made of maple as well. The scroll, again, maple. Because it's a hard wood, it retains its shape better.
And these are all hand carved?
Yes.
Now, is the original work done in China or done here inside the work studio?
The original work is done in China on these particular violins, and what we do is we bring them to perfection here in terms of setup. Because I play the violin, I know about what violinists have to deal with in terms of problems, specifically in terms of what we call setup, which involves the bridge, the fingerboard, which is made of ebony. That's the third type of wood. And also the sound post, which is something that it's very difficult to see when you're looking at a violin, but it is inside there. It's a post about this long, and it's on the treble side, or the higher string side of the violin. On the bass side, or the G string side of the violin, for example, you have a bass bar, and that supports the bridge foot on that side. So on this side you have a sound post, on this side you have a bass bar, and they're supporting approximately 60 pounds of pressure, which is downward pressure on the belly itself. We call this the belly or the top, either one. And it has to be maintained in order to perform the pieces that are necessary to perform these days.
That contour that you get to the face of the violin, is that hot pressed, or is that a carved piece of the instrument?
No, it's actually carved. We wind up cutting a piece out of a tree at a certain angle and then sculpting the top with finger planes. We call them finger planes because they're very small. And they carve out this shape. It is not pressed out, it is simply carved. And the inside is carved as well. So first we do the outside, and then we do the inside with the same planes. Afterwards, we put in the bass bar, and we glue the top on.
Let's take a look at that scroll work that you have there. That seems to be a nice little work of art you have there.
Yeah, these are kind of neat. They're carved out of one piece of wood. Obviously, the fingerboard itself is from a completely different species of tree, but this is a very artistic operation, and a lot of people who make violins and have made violins over the centuries have been judged by the quality of their scrolls as well as the quality of the work they did on their tops and their backs, etc.
From start to finish, how long does it take to craft a violin or a viola?
It takes me about a month to do it correctly. I could do it faster, but I couldn't do it faster as well as I would like.
And this larger one is a viola?
That's correct, yes. This is
And
actually viola.
what is the difference between a violin and a viola?
The difference is that they're tuned 1/5 lower. So whereas you have an E string on the top of a violin, the top string, or the first string on a viola, is the A string. So you have A, D, G, and then under that you have a C. So it's, the violin is tuned in fifths, the viola is tuned in fifths, the cello is tuned in fifths. It all works the same way. So they're very predictable in terms of how do you play them. But really the basic difference is violas have a much richer sound. There's not a lot of literature written for the viola.
But they're all part of the string section
Yes.
that intermingle with each other and give it such dramatic sounds to the orchestra.
Yeah, they all work together. That's the main thing. And you couldn't have one without another in an orchestral situation. It's impossible.
And you're working now together with people in China.
Yeah,
It all kind of fits together now, doesn't it?
it does.
Wow. Listen, thanks for being our guest, Guy, and what fascinating work you do here in your shop. Say, you know what, Guy? I think it would be great if you would play for our next Oaklander segment on the work of the Nyack artist, Mortimer Bourne. What do you say? And now the Oaklander would like to present the story of the world-renowned dry point artist, Mortimer Bourne.
Recognized today by museums and art historians throughout America, Mortimer Bourne was an artist whose creativity and innovation flourished through painting, sculpture, drawings, graphics, inventions, teachings, and writings. Some of the artist's most distinctive work began in the late 1920s with his interest in the dry point technique. These graphics have become important historical documentation of life in New York City streets, subways, and cafeterias, eastern U.S. landscapes, and Jerusalem. Mortimer played a direct part in historical reference to the year 1937 in this piece, Construction of the West Side Highway. Depicts the men and machinery at work on the project. During the time of the WPA, it was not unusual for the U.S. government to pay unemployed workers to repair some of New York's streets, as depicted in this scene, 1934 West Street at 10th Street.
My name is Gary Johnson. I'm a trustee of the Mortimer Bourne Trust and also a trustee of the Rudolf Steiner Fellowship Foundation. And I'm here this afternoon to share with you a little bit about the life and work of Mortimer Bourne and his wife Ray. Mortimer Bourne was born in 1902 in Poland, and as a young man was early recognized for his affinity to art and for his many artistic talents. He studied in Poland, and then as a young man came to New York City where he lived in Brooklyn for some time. He met his wife Ray, and they moved to Nyack, where they eventually had a home and a place that they called the Tappan Zee Art Center. As far as the work of Mortimer Bourne is concerned, it is quite varied and he was quite prolific. For example, he is probably best known for his perfection of the colored dry point process. Dry point itself is a process whereby the artist draws with a diamond-tipped needle on a copper plate. That raises a burr on the copper plate, which holds the ink so that the impression can be printed. But when it comes to color dry point, that's quite another process, because a separate plate, must be created for each color. That means that the artistry is as much in the printing as it is in the drawing with the diamond stylus.
Mortimer Bourne, while master of the black and white dry point, was the inventor of color dry point, a very difficult technique of creating 3 copper plates of red, yellow, and blue for each subject. Using lines of varying intensity on each plate combined to bring endless degrees of color, tone, and texture. This invention is important in that it makes possible effects not attainable via any other medium. Some of the color dry points were also reproduced in black and white, as seen in landscape, Site of the World's Fair, 1938, in Flushing Meadow Park, Queens. The stoop is a color dry point. A scene of a summer day in Brooklyn Heights, 1949. It must have held a special interest for Mortimer. First done as a color dry point, it was to reappear as an oil on canvas over 30 years later.
In addition to the dry point process, Mortimer was active in a great number of other artistic mediums. He did, for example, a lot of drawings. He almost never was without his sketchbook, and his sketches are quite frequent insofar as subway scenes are concerned. He loved to ride the New York subway series and catch people sort of unaware, if you will.
In his desire to express reality in a most basic and direct form, Mortimer would always carry a sketchbook. He was drawn to places where he could observe people without being noticed. Subways and cafeterias often served as studios. The artist was able to quickly capture an entire scenario with just a few lines, as seen in these drawings.
Another medium which Mortimer worked in was the area of woodcuts, where he would prepare the woodcuts so that he could print them on rice paper. He was particularly prolific in this area in regard to religious work inspired by his study of the Old Testament.
Mortimer was a master of many mediums, as seen in these woodcuts, where he would use different woods to create color, texture, and detail.
However, did most of that for him. She wrote to most of the museums and shared samples of his works, and the museums eagerly accepted his works into their collections. She also interested people in his works and sold some of his works out of their little house in Nyack. Ray and Mortimer were very, very close. I would say they were as close as it is possible for a husband and wife to be. When Mortimer suffered a heart attack at his Rotary Club meeting and died shortly thereafter in the hospital, Ray was just shattered. Her whole life had been Mortimer, and she couldn't really maintain her health without Mortimer. So about 9 months after Mortimer's death, at the fellowship community in Spring Valley, we received a call from her doctor who asked if in our care community for the aged we couldn't find a space for Ray, which we did. And so Ray came to live with us here at the fellowship. She explained when she came that her husband's artwork had been turned over to the federal government along with their house, and the government was going to turn it into a federal museum, which, based on everything that we knew about Mortimer, of course, made perfect sense. But then the years went by, and after nearly, I guess it was nearly 4 years, we received a telephone call from the South Nyack Chief of Police, who suggested that we come over and take a look at the house because it appeared that someone might have broken in. Well, by that time, Ray was having difficulty with her mobility, so she couldn't go over herself. My wife and I went over, and what we found was a very rapidly aging house, since it was not being cared for, but obviously at one time very, very beautiful.
Artwork. He was a really great person. I knew him personally also.
Really?
So they were great people, yes. And I missed them because they were nice neighbors and nice to talk and very, very pleasant people. So I'm glad that you're doing the work and that people should know, because his work is really tremendous. And I have been to his exhibition and now posthumously, and when they have in Nyack on Main Street, and I hope that they continue, spread the word about him. Okay?
Thank you so much.
Sure.
One of his areas of activity was also very unusual. He termed his sculpture work chromatic wood sculpture. Now, Mortimer was a very devoted Rotarian. He belonged to the Nyack Rotary Club. And as a Rotarian, he had access to the Rotary clubs throughout the world. And he used this access in order to acquire indigenous and rare woods from all across the world. He then would take these and create his chromatic wood sculpture. The reason these are so different is that Mortimer believed that the sculpture process should not be limited to just taking away, for example, from a block of wood, but also ought to be expanded to include a building up process. So out of these woods, he would build these beautiful figures without any stains, without any paint, using the natural color of the woods. Some of his sculptures were enormous. There is one, for example, that the Trust still has, entitled Isaiah, which is approximately 10 feet high and 8 feet wide. A very beautiful work of art.
Mortimer's paintings include unusual works on convex canvas of the New York subway scenes. He also did portraits, landscapes, and many views of Nyack. There are also many thought-provoking abstract works.
In addition to being a very creative human being, Mortimer Bourne was a very religious man. Mortimer studied very extensively the Old Testament and used it as a theme for many of his works of art. Many of his pencil drawings and his black and white drawings were using Old Testament themes. In his dry points, many of them described scenes in Jerusalem and the surrounding countryside. He and his wife spent a great deal of time in Jerusalem, and he has gifted many of his works to Jewish museums and Jewish universities, and he has been very generous to not-for-profit organizations in Israel, many of which have examples of his work. But he did many, many dry points, and we still have a lot of them available at the gallery in Nyack, which represent beautiful, beautiful scenes from Jerusalem.
In 1935, on the occasion of his one-man show of prints at the New Gallery in Jerusalem, Mortimer traveled with the intention of taking the opportunity to do some dry points there. The artist worked for several months and produced approximately 30 plates as seen in these works.
Being a religious man, Mortimer puzzled over the question of what is happening to art in our modern culture. Why is it that we can't seem to produce in the world today the same quality of art as existed when the old masters were at work? And many, many years, Mortimer puzzled over that question. In some of his writings, I came across a conclusion that he came to just several years before his death. And he came to the conclusion that the reason there was a decline in art was that there was a decline, corresponding decline, in religious values. And it was those values that Mortimer felt gave the artist their inner enthusiasm, their inner insights to produce art of such a high quality. I want to thank all of you for spending time with us on this program and listening to the explanation of the works of Mortimer Bourne. And those of us who are active in the Bourne Trust and at the fellowship community want to close with an invitation for you to visit the Trust Gallery in Nyack.
Mortimer's imagination was stimulated by a doctrine that states that each object in the universe has either a mind or unconscious psyche. Here he depicts two violins in communication through the vibration of sound.
Our thanks to Guy Cole for sharing his time and his musical talent on this month's project. To Gary Johnson, Kathleen Keaty, and Marty Schrantz of the Fellowship community in Chestnut Ridge, New York, for providing knowledge and guidance on Mortimer Bourne's life and art. To Larry Martin at the Bourne Gallery in Nyack for his enthusiasm and assistance. Thanks to Jack DeCristofaro for his video camera work when we needed it the most. And to my wife, Elizabeth, for finding Mortimer's work and inspiring us all through her love of the arts. We hope you have enjoyed our show tonight, and we thank you for watching. For the Oaklander, I'm your host, Al DiGiacomo, and we'll see you next time.
Hello, my name is Judy Pivorato, and I represent St. Paul's Players Community Theater Group, a group under the auspices of St. Paul's Church in Prospect Park, New Jersey. We are currently in rehearsal for our production of Jesus Christ Superstar. Performances begin on April 19th. Please call for tickets at 790-8169 from 8:30 to 4:30 p.m. and in the evening 6:30 to 9:30, 839-3856. We invite anyone interested in joining our community theater group to also call 790-8169. We are looking for members in all aspects of theater production. It's a great opportunity to show off your acting talent, your dancing, your singing, and also contribute or learn the behind-the-scenes work of successful theater production.